Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome here to the 20th SCoTENS annual conference. I am Gabrielle Nageer, co-chair of the SCoTENS committee, a role that I share with Dr. Maria Campbell, who was here a second ago, and you'll meet during the course of the day. A few housekeeping points. Firstly, you may have been asked if you're happy enough about photographs. You see a lot of cameras around here. If you have any issue about that at all, please don't hesitate to mention that to Tricia or to any of the committee, or to mention it at reception, and we'll make sure that your photographs aren't included in any of the publicity documents. Do feel free to tweet during the course of the event, please, and you'll see the hashtag on the front cover of our lovely programme. So, as chairperson, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the annual conference of SCoTENS. I extend a warm welcome to special guests who are joining us today. Minister Norma Foley, who will soon be here to formally open the conference for us on behalf of the Department of Education. I also welcome Alison Chambers, Director of Promoting Collaboration and Tackling Disadvantage in the Department of Education in Northern Ireland. We are delighted to welcome two learned and dynamic keynote speakers whom you will hear over the course of the 2 days, Professor Kathleen Lynch and Dr. Rachel Shanks. We will also later meet with Shared Island staff from the Department of the Taoiseach, and this welcome extends to my colleagues, those hard-working SCoTENS committee members, and to the staff of the Centre of Cross-Border Studies, who provide crucial support for the committee, and to the wider SCoTENS family, many of whom are here today, whether it's to participate in one or two of the events, or simply to enjoy the opportunity to share your expertise and to learn from one another in the very best of company. That spirit of collaboration remains central to the vision espoused by SCoTENS. As an educational community, SCoTENS promotes initiatives that reach across borders. Over the last 2 decades, lasting partnerships in teacher education have evolved throughout the island of Ireland, making advances in research and informing practice in classrooms, both north and south, and building also on our international connections. This might be an opportune moment to express sincere gratitude to funders and benefactors who make the work of SCoTENS possible. Primarily the Departments of Education, North and in South and in Northern Ireland. More recent developments have been generously funded by the Department of the Taoiseach, and an extension to the Student Exchange Programme is to be facilitated by the Irish-American Partnership. All SCoTENS members also contribute to this work with your fees, and we thank you for that. There are 3 strands to the core work of the committee, and they interconnect in the interest of teacher educators, teachers, student teachers, and most importantly, their pupils. The 3 main activities organised and promoted each year are the Student Exchange Programme, the seed-funded research programme, and the annual conference. The Student Exchange team met with school placement coordinators from universities and colleges this morning to discuss plans for the reintroduction of face-to-face shared learning for our student teachers across jurisdictions. The virtual element in the programme will also be retained, building on the innovative work carried out during the pandemic. Last year we saw wonderful examples of creativity and critical thinking and sharing of resources among our student teachers, those who participated in the online programme. The seed funding programme supports partnerships among teacher educators and other members of the wider educational community, advancing collaborative research activity that impacts on teaching and learning. This year, SCoTENS was delighted to work in close partnership with the Shared Island Unit of the Department of the Taoiseach on an educational research initiative. This development not only fostered new relationships between researchers across borders, but also enhanced the relationship and mutual respect between the department's Shared Island team and the SCoTENS team led by Maria Campbell. We look forward to the launch of the first 2 reports from studies conducted as part of this programme later this evening. You may have seen on our website or through social media channels that the Irish Journal of Education has issued a call for papers for a special SCoTENS edition of the journal. If you're currently engaged in a SCoTENS-funded project or in recent years have completed one, please do take this opportunity to submit a short article or a slightly longer article and to contribute to this special edition. I have been asked to announce that the deadline is the 7th of November, so just about enough time to get busy writing. Details are on the SCoTENS website. And finally, we come to the annual conference, the 3rd core activity of SCoTENS that is now in its 20th year. This year's theme challenges us to reflect, reconnect, and re-engage with the core purposes of education. At a time of global economic, political, environmental turmoil, it is timely that we in the education community can take a moment to pause, to reflect, to listen to one another. And that's what this conference is all about. With regard to the programme for today, some of you may have already attended the student exchange event or the doctoral roundtable workshops that were held just a few hours ago. Thank you to everyone who participated in those sessions. They were inspiring, actually. In a moment, I will invite the Minister of Education to open the conference formally. Minister Foley's address will be followed by the keynote speaker, Professor Lynch, and there will then be a break for refreshments and a chance to carry on conversations. At 3:15, please head directly either to meeting room 1 or meeting room 2 for the parallel sessions of your choice. There will be committee members circulating to guide you to those locations. We will all convene again in the Hamilton Suite area at 6:30 for the final part of today's programme. So we wish you all an enjoyable, successful conference, and I now would like to ask Minister Foley to please open the 20th Annual Conference of SCoTENS.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a very great pleasure for me as Minister for Education to address you all this afternoon at the 20th Annual SCoTENS Conference. I am particularly pleased to be with you in person, for whilst the virtual world has served us well during COVID, it can never quite replace the warmth and engagement of an in-person gathering. So thank you all for being here. At the outset, I would sincerely like to express my personal appreciation to the Council and indeed to your co-chairs, Dr. Maria Campbell of St Angela's College Sligo and Dr. Gabrielle Niguir of St Mary's University College Belfast for the invitation to be with you here this afternoon. I would also like to extend a particular welcome to Alison Chambers, Director in the Department of Education, Northern Ireland. It is, I believe, truly wonderful to have such high-level representation, north and south, and I know it will be a rewarding experience for all of us gathered here. For schools both north and south, the past 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic have presented very, very significant challenges. And I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank every school community for their hard work, dedication and commitment in continuing education provision to the greatest extent possible. Of course, the pandemic was very quickly followed by the devastating invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which has sadly compelled millions of Ukrainians to leave their homeland and seek sanctuary abroad. Thousands of displaced Ukrainian families have arrived to the island of Ireland, and many of whom are children and young people. From my visits around the country, I know how seamlessly and indeed how warmly these young people have been welcomed into our schools, and for that I am most grateful. Indeed, in my personal engagements with the Ukrainian ambassador to Ireland and the Ukrainian Minister for Education, both have highlighted to me the absolute importance of education to the Ukrainian people and how much they value and appreciate the welcome their children and young people have received in our schools. Thank you to you too for the role you have played in facilitating this. At its heart, education is about cooperation and learning from one another. No one person or group here today, or indeed around this island, holds a monopoly of wisdom on education. I strongly believe to enrich the education experience for each one of us, we do need to listen to each other, engage with one another, and ultimately learn from one another's experience. I believe it was Helen Keller who once remarked, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." And I do know that that is very much the spirit in which each one of you are engaging here today, and for that I salute you. Thank you for being here, and indeed for your willingness to share what you know and what you have learned over the past number of years. I have no doubt that each of us attending here today will be all the richer for the wisdom and collective shared knowledge that will be transmitted amongst all of us as we gather together. I appreciate the generosity of your pooling of knowledge and expertise and the benefit that it will be to all of us. This year has been a very positive one for SCoTENS, not least because of the resumption of the in-person North-South teacher exchange, which has been expanded indeed to include more students. There is so much to be learned from direct, on-the-ground experience, and the teacher exchange encapsulates the very best of this by bringing together student teachers, tutors, and teacher educators from both jurisdictions and placing them in our schools. I have always loved the very succinct observation of the American writer and educationalist Sarah Margaret Fuller, who once remarked, "If you have knowledge, let others light their candles in it." It is a simple, yet noteworthy image, one which reminds us of both the transformative power of knowledge and of our responsibility to share it as best we can. Discussion and contributions to the dialogues both today and tomorrow will provide an opportunity for us to learn from each other and gain insights into different perspectives and, more importantly, allow for open discussion on the role of education and where we can together strive for a better future. I might even be so bold as to suggest that there might well be some differences of opinion, but I truly believe that is exactly where the magic lies. On a personal note, I am very, very pleased that you have chosen to take the time and indeed make the time to explore the links between education, schooling, and societal well-being. Now, more than ever, having overcome so many challenges over the last 2 years, it is an ideal opportunity or moment to push the pause button, reflect, reconnect with each other, and re-engage with the core purposes of education. Given SCoTENS' strong record in opening up dialogue and fostering mutual understanding and cooperation, it is deeply fitting that SCoTENS has been selected to support the work of the Shared Island Initiative. As you will know, the Shared Island Initiative is funded by the Share Island Unit, which is held within the Department of An Taoiseach Micheál Martin. The unit seeks to spark engagement with all communities and traditions, to build consensus around a shared future, and to deliver tangible benefits for the entire community across the island. This initiative strives to look to the future on this island in a positive way, in a manner which doesn't compromise anyone's identity or aspirations, whether that be unionist, nationalist, or indeed any other viewpoint. I am delighted to say that there has been significant collaboration with more than 2,000 citizens from across all communities and traditions on how exactly, in practical ways, we could better share this island of ours. 5 SCoTENS shared island research projects have already been funded as part of the initiative, exploring themes of educational attainment and curriculum delivery north and south. Having launched the SCoTENS shared island work in December of last year, I am pleased today to welcome the publication of the first 2 reports under this programme in response to the theme of enhancing educational attainment, sharing experience and learning on a shared island. The Building Bridge Diminishing Educational Disadvantage, or BUDDIES study, across 6 schools, led by researchers from Stranmillis University College Belfast and University College Dublin, focuses on the lived reality role of homeschool community liaison and explores how they operate in schools from early years to post-primary, serving the disadvantaged in our communities. I know you will hear much more shortly about this report, but I was particularly interested in how the roles on both sides of the border differ quite a bit from one another, yet both really focus on bringing an holistic perspective and skill set to the roles. Both programmes are intent on breaking down barriers, changing mindsets, providing supports for the families which avail of the service, and ultimately building bridges between home and school for the greater benefit of our students. This initiative is yet another strong example of how we stand to learn so much from one another. The second project report, which will be launched today, is the shared project, Student Hopes, Achievement, Research, Equity and Diversity, an initiative of researchers from the Marino Institute of Education Dublin and St Mary's University College Belfast. This report examines how student teachers are prepared to engage on the challenges of educational underachievement as part of their school placement. Coming from this report is really the need for us to constantly strive for better, and indeed the need to support teachers in schools as they too strive for better. Teacher education is not something which can be isolated to the beginning of a teacher's career. It is a process, one which continues right through a teacher's career, and our systems need to be built around this fact. The report highlights a number of key recommendations to support student teachers whilst on school placements, namely around teacher continuous professional development, curriculum and teacher educators. I welcome these recommendations, and I know that they will be considered closely by all of those involved in teacher education. I welcome the 2 projects I have specifically referenced this afternoon, and the other 3 SCoTENS shared island projects that have recently received funding. All of these projects will greatly contribute to the evidence base for educators and policymakers north and south. These initiatives aim to assist and inform how collectively we can work to avail of the untapped opportunities of cooperating and interacting on education, both north-south and east-west. With both confidence and experience, I do say that education is our bedrock, as individuals and as a society. And it is, and will be, fundamental to how we make the journey of reconciliation together on this island. Under Budget 2023, my department has secured a significant budget of €180 million for our Delivering Equality of Opportunity in Schools programme, which is aimed at tackling educational disadvantage. The learnings so far from this DESH programme were shared with the Department of Education in Northern Ireland as part of its A Fair Start programme. Practices and experiences in both jurisdictions are being used to improve, adapt and continue our efforts to ensure that all children and young people, regardless of their background, are given the best possible start in life. As regards well-being, whilst it has always been central to our school communities, I do know that following the pandemic, we are all particularly conscious of the need to promote more and more positive student well-being. We know from research, and indeed from lived experience, that preventing bullying is one of the most powerful actions which we can take to support student well-being. Whilst our schools are already doing powerful work in this area, I recognise that further improvement and supports are needed. It is for this reason that in February of this year, I established a steering committee to review the 2013 Action Plan on Bullying. I would like to particularly take a moment to thank Dr. Noel Purdy for chairing the steering committee. I know that the steering committee have benefited greatly from his experience, expertise and excellent chairing skills, and I'm sure that all of you here at this conference will benefit similarly when Dr. Purdy addresses you later today. The review explores the significant developments and relevant research since the Action Plan on Bullying was published in 2013. And it gives consideration to the very important areas of cyberbullying, identity-based bullying and sexual harassment, amongst other key areas, together with the recommendations contained in the Oireachtas Joint Committee report on school bullying and the impact on mental health, which was published in August of 2021. In parallel with this work, a working group has been established to review and update anti-bullying procedures for both primary and post-primary schools. The Department of Education has engaged in a wide-ranging consultation process as regards this topic, and I am very pleased to say to you that this included consultation with almost 200 children and young people, including children with special educational needs, traveller and Roma children, and refugees, including children from Ukraine. I am also pleased to say that the steering committee have almost completed their work, and I look forward to their report. No pressure there, Dr. Purdy, on the timeline. But as I begin to conclude, I would again like to restate my own commitment to continuing to work closely with our education departments and ministers in Northern Ireland, always striving to place the student at the very heart of our work. I often think that people involved in education are amongst the most fortunate in any society, for it is those of us who are involved in education who are offered the chance to engage with the next generation and to serve and shape the future in the manner in which we would like to see it. It is, of course, an important sentiment that all of you here share today. I want to sincerely express my thanks to all of you for participating in events over the next 2 days of this conference. I believe, and I truly believe, this is an invaluable opportunity for you to meet in person and to continue to listen and, most importantly, learn from one another. I look forward to the outcomes of your engagements and our shared agenda, which is, as always, to support and serve the children and young people in our care. And indeed, long may it remain our mission to share our knowledge and support others to light their candles in it. Gur míle maith agaibh go léir.
On behalf of SCoTENS, I would like to warmly thank Minister Foley for her address. You gave us such insights there into all of the work that is going on in your department and right across the country, really, to support children and to promote those educational values, protect our children. So it's very encouraging. Thank you. At this point, we move on, and it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today, the first day of our conference. Our committee was delighted to learn that Professor Kathleen Lynch has agreed to address delegates at the SCoTENS conference as guest speaker. Kathleen is Professor Emeritus in the School of Education, UCD. Her life's work has been in academia, but she is also known as an activist, someone whose research and published works impact upon people's lives, setting out to challenge injustice and inequalities. In her work, Kathleen reclaims the language of love, care, and solidarity to inform public discourse and to challenge social injustices. Her most recent book, Care and Capitalism, has some really important messages for the educational community. Kathleen is also well known for having established the UCD Equality Studies Centre, which became a focal point for social reform and inspired many activists who were members of that centre. I'd like to welcome Professor Lynch to come and make her keynote address.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much to everybody in SCoTENS for inviting me to speak. I'm very pleased to be here, but always a little bit anxious about speaking to teacher educators. I think there are a lot of specialists in the field, so I hope I have something to contribute today. This is what I'm going to speak about because there are 2 or 3 contexts, I suppose, which I'm writing. One is obviously my research over the years in education, but also specifically more recently, I suppose the impact of COVID, although I wrote a book, Care and Capitalism, Why Effective Equality Matters for Social Justice. Before COVID, I started writing it and just finished it around COVID, the time of COVID. But I didn't realise how salient it would be or how timely it would be, I suppose, at the time. But more importantly, I suppose, is the fact that more recently I've been invited to join a European roundtable of educators who are really concerned about the direction of education globally. There is also an Asian roundtable, there is a North American roundtable, and there is a Latin American roundtable. And there are about 17 or 18 countries involved in the European one, but it also includes Russia, for example, and Turkey. And in these discussions recently, I suppose it confirms some of my concerns about the direction of education and some of what I think could be changed, maybe. Although, as I say, there are so many experts here, I don't have answers, I have questions, but I hope I have something to say. So I want to begin by referring to the global crises, and because there are many, and I'll talk about those, and what questions they raise for us as educators. And I think why we need to focus on capitalism and its impact on education globally and locally, particularly because of its internal logic, because that's what I write about in the book particularly, is the carelessness that is induced by a logic where acquisition and the accrual of wealth actually dominates public thinking and indeed often education thinking. To spell out maybe some of its implications for education and to argue for moving beyond what I have called, and what I hope to be the subject of my new book more specifically, capitalocentric education and some of its dilemmas. If you look at, I'm sorry there's too much text here, but I have to do this for myself so I know what I'm saying. The COVID pandemic, created enormous inequalities. It has exacerbated them exponentially. You now have the 10 richest billionaires. They own more wealth. It's doubled during COVID, and they own more wealth than 3.1 billion people, or the poorest 3.1 billion in the world. And the wealth, COVID exacerbated ethnic conflicts. Gender-based violence, which is very rarely discussed, which has greatly been exacerbated, included the death of women and girls due to the home-based violence during COVID. And of course, it had created a gross exacerbation in the deaths of a lot of people, which were needless had there been vaccines available to vaccine inequality. But prior to the pandemic, the world is becoming economically more unequal. And we can't hide away from the fact that no matter how glorious our thoughts are about education, we are in the middle of it. What has education got to say about these things? Or do we go on teaching our subjects as if nothing is happening in the wider world? Because since 1995, the top 1% of humanity have acquired nearly 20 times more of the global wealth than the bottom 50%. And we are in that top 1%. We are the wealthiest in the world, in this part of the world. We're in a place where wars are ubiquitous, whether it's Yemen, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Ukraine. There is Central Africa. Mass murder, which has now become normalized because you don't see the killing. And I watched the other night a film about what led to a documentary led to the First World War. And what struck me is it was from German records, how they videoed the killing of people. And you saw people being killed. You don't see them being killed now because we've anonymized it and cellulite it. But we're still killing, and it's mostly civilians. So what has education to say about war? What is it to say about rising poverty? There are 160 million more people who are in poverty now as a result of the pandemic. And we know that every day people are dying of hunger, increasingly throughout the world. So I think we have starvation and we have environmental destruction. And then, of course, what we have in Europe is the rise of an anti-immigrant, aggressive, nationalist, populist right. And I think we're a bit, what shall I say, in Ireland, we're a bit maybe naive in thinking this will not come to our doors. If there was a recession here, we would not be unlike Sweden, where you have the rise of a strong anti-immigrant populist right in the last election, or indeed in Italy. So that is where we're at, and democracy, there's a huge rise in anti-democratic systems, whether you're talking about Hungary, whether you're talking about Russia, but it is all over the world. It is in the United States, and it moved towards autocracy. And I think that raises a lot of questions about what has education to say. There's a rise in the power of neoliberal capitalism, and especially financial capitalism. It is enormously powerful. It can close down, as Britain has learned, the UK the other day, thinking that the pound was resilient. It's not resilient. It can be closed down by wealthy investors at the drop of a hat. It can be completely undermined. So we have granted power to a tiny elite in the world. Like Elon Musk, as you probably know, is about to buy Twitter while he's talking of it. If he does, he will control the biggest communication network there is in the world, in a world where there's big declining democracy. You might say to me, why do we focus on capitalism? Well, I think because, come to education, it undermines public education. I refer to Sweden there, where you have seen lately a very powerful social democratic state introduce private academies. Even Finland, which has been shown up, I suppose, or declared to be the kind of pinnacle of virtue, there is a pressure to move in the same direction. And I'm saying the protection of private property is part of capitalism. It's part of its raison d'etre. Whether you agree with it or not, it is there. But what neoliberalism promotes is the privatization and commercialization of assets, including public assets. The idea of a small, cheap state. We have seen it here, not so much in education, because in fairness to the players in education, there has been enormous resistance. Of course, we have private education here, because a lot of schools are privately owned, but they are not commercial. They are not there to make money. And I think what's happening, though, is this idea of limiting investment in the state. Particularly, we have seen it in the care of older people, which I think is absolutely shocking, that 80% of the care of the elderly is now entirely in the for-profit sector. So what I'm saying, by not confronting it, by not engaging with capitalism, by not talking about it in schools, in higher education, we've institutionalized a lot of its market logic and values throughout public services and in voluntary and community services, whether people like it or not. I was speaking the other day at the North and South Inner City Community Groups Association of meetings of activists in the city, and they were talking about how they have to apply market logic and count all the disabled people and other people, how many get work, etc., even though it's meaningless often where their work lies. So I'm saying that there is a serious problem of democracy in the world. And, you know, we could say that the problem in the UK is the first past the post doesn't work, or it's the same in the United States, but you can't say that about Sweden, because it is a very different kind of democracy. There is a corrosion of democracy that comes when you have the concentration of wealth in a small number of hands, because people can manipulate politics and they can manipulate public opinion, as we saw in the last election in the United States. So what I'm saying is neoliberalism changes its definition of who is a citizen and what is a citizen. It is premised on the assumption that your relationship to the state and member of society is determined and managed by market norms and values. You are defined as a customer with market preferences rather than a democratic citizen with needs, rights and responsibilities. So what we're creating by often our silences, by not naming it, by not claiming it, is we are creating new human subjectivities. Privatized citizens who manage their own risks, the development of what I call the actuarial self, where you think everything will be done whether or not it benefits my CV, whether or not it benefits my career. Everything will be calculated on the basis of risk to myself. And this whole myth of focusing on individual responsibility for failure and owning your own success, as if any of us were ever successful without the support of other people. And to give you a concrete example, the language of customers, has completely invaded the infrastructure of the state, certainly in the Republic of Ireland. You have the Department of Further Higher Education, for example. I just said November 91 has a customer charter. The Departments of Education, Environment, Agriculture, all have customer charters. Even the revenue commissioners, which I find very funny actually, there are 2,262 references to customers. How you could be a customer of the revenue commissioners, I don't know, given that you have to pay your taxes. The health service has references to customers. But how in a democracy, where you have rights and human rights, under the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Declaration, a right to education and a right to health care, how can you be a customer? Because a customer is somebody who buys something on the market. And we have mutated and changed our relationship between the citizen and the state by our nomenclature. People will often say, language doesn't matter. Sorry, language doesn't just define things, it alters our perception of reality, and it has very serious consequences. So what I'm saying, the cultural morality of neoliberal capitalism undermines care for others and the earth itself. It valorizes ambition and competition as virtues, endorsing forms of self-entrepreneurial individualism and responsibilization that are highly self-referential. And that is what we do. I was shocked the other day when I was on a platform with a professor from the UK, a very eminent woman, and she said to me, even though she doesn't need to do it, she is extremely well known, she said she got up every morning and the first thing she checks is where her standing is on her index in terms of how she's doing for her citations, etc. I mean, what has come to us that is how we measure our worth? And at the cultural level, of course, it encourages consumerism, because we have the proliferation of goods, most of which have no value other than to maintain a hold on the market. You have 5 different types of shampoo, whether it'll be this, that, or the other, which are irrelevant, most of which are a variation on the same, but they hold and control a market. And it doesn't matter that it's environmentally destructive, because we are getting new markets. We are increasing growth. And I'm saying the capitalist morality builds on the idealization of choice, and equality is made a lower order value. So inequality is normalized. The rise of the democratic, meritocratic myths, as if IQ plus effort. Of course, my first job, I have to say, was in educational testing and measurement, and so I absolutely know there is no such thing as innate intelligence. I have to say, I've never, if ever a thing that I subscribe to, that is one of my firmest beliefs, that these are measures of attainment. But we create this myth that somehow some people have capabilities, whereas others do not, whereas in fact some people have great resources to develop their capabilities and others do not. So everything is about time and speed. If you look at schools, we have to do exams in a time space, as if speed itself was a virtue. And of course, you could go back to Marx and the Grundrisse, and you would see that he wrote about speed and competition as being the virtues of capitalism. We have embedded them in our very institutions of education, regardless of their worth or their value. And what we're talking about well-being and the mental health, these have often become sidelines. The adverse impact of competitiveness on mental health and social life is regarded as incidental. And many institutions have become very careless of their staff. I know there's a lot of talk about students, but if we don't care for our staff, then we won't be able to care for our students as well. So what I'm saying is that there are new norms. Not alone do we creating new subjectivities where citizens have mutated to becoming customers, we've created new organisational norms within our public services and within education. A new ideal type citizens, a focus on market efficiency that overrides and weakens other values. So we see people in transactional terms. Do we see the people even just in education? They were a means to an end, good grades, to rise in ranking, to outcompeting other schools, outcompeting our colleagues, constantly measuring ourselves in a competitive zone, even though we are not sure why we're doing it, except to win, because the virtue is to win. It's always to win. And people who don't win, students who are not successful, we find various means, whether it's through having selective entry at schools or selective entry into education programs at higher education that is unnecessary. It's a way of saying we do not want the unproductive. We do not want people who will in any way diminish our status or our power as an institution. So what happens is that first order social moral values are reduced to second order principles. Trust, integrity, care, compassion and solidarity are subordinated to regulation, control and competition. And once we start to measure everything, once we reduce human worth to a numerical code, then the amoral becomes the necessitous. We start to count everything. And documenting attainment, rank, etc. becomes an industry in itself, which it has. It becomes something that you do as part of life, and you measure your own worth that way. So I'm just saying there is a new morality. Not just in Ireland, and it's not just unique to Ireland, this is a global phenomenon. Across public services, education are disciplined through market morality rather than democratic morality or an ethic of care. And they don't just service the market anymore, we begin to emulate it. Like my colleague who had internalized every morning assessing herself online to see her citations. And I think that is the focus then becomes a shift in the entire from nurture and development to productivity. Now, let me just say, I was involved in the early years in 1994, 5, 6, that time, in strongly arguing for free higher education, in believing that we needed to develop indigenous industries, in arguing that we need to have expertise, that we needed to create an important capacity in our own local economy. And I will always stand by that, and the development of the IT sector, etc., pharmaceuticals, etc., is proof that that policy did work. So I'm not saying we do not need economic expertise, we do not need specialisms, we do not need to have a market economy. We do. But what I'm saying is we need to create something else as well. And what I'm saying is that this neoliberal capitalist-led education has an ethical code that is informed by history, though, and this is where I would come back to this liberal view of education, to go back to Descartes and others. It's an atomistic, rational view of the human condition, as if we were isolated individuals, as if we on our own could create things. Because that is the relationality and interdependency of the human condition is largely ignored in education. For the state, the goal is to reduce the market-ready cosmopolitan worker, ideally around a calculating entrepreneurial self who service the economy. Hence, we celebrate the brothers who've made huge amount of money in whatever it's called, Stripe or whatever it is. We celebrate it as if this was a great virtue, and it is good. But how is that money distributed? Who benefits? How is the question of distribution addressed if people become arch capitalists and extremely successful, often on the benefits and on the largesse of the state who have invested in their primary, secondary and higher education? For individuals, it's about personalised acquisition, diplomas, degrees, and outcompeting others. So I'm saying, what kind of society do we want? I think we do need to ask that question. Do we going to move beyond Homo economicus? I list there the 8 competencies of the EU and a commission. And what I find is interesting, having examined their competencies in a more recent report, is the ones marked in red are the ones that have received most attention, and those are the ones that are most market-oriented. Mathematics, science and technology, digital, and entrepreneurship. So the Sustainable Development Goals is focusing on quality of education, making it accessible to all. But I ask the question, what is the content of the quality of education? And how will pedagogical practice impact on what is learned? There's no reference in most education now, certainly not in Europe that I know of, to ethical education. And this is a big issue because people do not agree on what is ethical or what is moral. But because we don't agree does not mean that it is not an issue. Because religion has been largely jettisoned from public discourse because of conflicts over religion, we have abandoned a debate about ethics within the public sphere. Education for the care of the earth and the rest of humanity. How do we educate people for that? We talk about the environmental crisis, but do we educate people on how to care for themselves and the earth and others? And we have a highly anthropocentric, care-indifferent view of education. In the book I've written, there is a chapter in it about violence. There are 2 on violence, but one is on the violence against non-human animals. But there is almost no discussion in this jurisdiction because you can't have the discussion about how we use and abuse animals, although they're sentient beings, mammals are, with a very simple, similar central nervous system to ourselves. We don't speak about it. It's silent. And I'm saying here, I'm just quoting the European Commission, showing and demonstrating really how it is so focused on the market, on industry, learning, training and learning for the labour market. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. We have to do that. That is reality. But is that all that we do? So come back. I think there's a problem with our ontological assumptions about the human condition. I suppose that's the heart of what I write in this book. Cartesian rationalism remains dominant, but it has been compounded by atomistic individualism, reflected in how we mark and grade everybody individually all the time, and in economic determinism, a focus on the market citizen. But human beings are not just cognitive rational actors. We are also emotional beings. We have feelings. We are Homo sapiens, Homo sentiens, and as Joan Tronto, the political theorist, said, we're Homo curans. We care for others. And our relationships is what makes us moral. And I think that there is a failure to address that in education, partly perhaps after the last war. People were so fearful, so afraid of engaging in this kind of debate, but it's a debate we have to have. What I want to say, I suppose, most of all, is what struck me over the years. I've done a lot of research on care in practice, not just in education, most recently, a study of higher education, which I haven't yet published. But is human life, it depends on care. When you're born, you're dependent. If you live long enough to be old, you will be dependent, and many times in between you will be. No citizen, no person is completely independent. And that interdependence is something we have to learn to do, and to do well. At the moment, it's taken as a given. As I said, love is the assumed food on the table of emotional life. People seem to think it's going to happen by osmosis. Love is work. Love is hard work. Care is hard work, and there are good and better ways of doing it, and very bad ways of doing it. And I'm saying now, in this, for example, the implicit assumption is you're the atomistic person who's going to follow your own career. Even you have graduation ceremonies in preschool, my God, giving them hats. showing their independence. But isn't that the myth of the human condition? We are not independent. We would die. Who provides the mic? Who built the lectern? Who provides the light? Everything we do is dependent on others. And emotionally and relationally, we would, as we found out during COVID, we would also die without the support of others. So I'm saying the assumption is now is that winning is what matters. Competitiveness, being top of the class, being excellent, if I hear that word, another centre of excellence. Where would you see the opposite, a centre of incompetence? You're not going to find it. I mean, it's ridiculous, the misuse of language. So the citizen, it's like this person who matters, is now not, you're not matter because you're old. I was saying to somebody there today before I came in, I visited 4 different nursing homes for a variety of reasons, people I know who are elderly at the moment. And this woman said to me the other day, you know, nobody wants people like me. She's 94, very capable woman, was a very senior nurse in Vincent's Hospital. I'm redundant. I don't matter. And I think that raises profound questions about our society, about who matters. If you can't contribute to the economy, do you no longer matter? And what I'm saying here is, take a concrete example of what I'm talking about. We changed the language from unemployment assistance to job seekers allowance. I think there's the equivalent in the north. I don't know what it's called now, but it's probably very similar. We probably borrowed it from the UK anyway, no, in Ireland. But what it says is that the understanding of dependency is taken away. You have to be looking for a job. And before I came today, I am supporting a young man I know a long time who's out of prison and all. He rang me this morning. He has as much hope of getting a job now as I have of flying to the moon. But he has to go and apply for, go on unemployment assistance, or what do they call it, job seekers allowance. He has mental health issues. He has physical health issues. He has many, many challenges in life. But there's a myth that he can't be dependent. And that's because you have to be seeking a job, even if you are not capable or haven't the physical or mental capacity to do it. Even people with disabilities, their activation, they have to be active, even if maybe they can only work 2 days a week or 1 day a week, or maybe they don't want to work 5 days a week. But there is an assumption you're not valuable unless you're active, particularly in the labour market. So what I'm saying, caring work, care for children, unpaid work, caring for your local community, is not seen as citizenship-defining work. Yet care is a fundamental value of all known societies. The disrespect, as somebody who I always felt, for people who are called housewives, of course, it's a derogatory term, because the assumption is that you were in a state of negative dependency. A lot of people didn't want to be there, don't get me wrong. I believe in people who all worked all my life in employment. But it is the disrespect we had for the people who did that work. But what I suppose I'm saying is, at the top of the pinnacle is these rational economic actors. And we educate people for the top layer, if you like, up here, you know, where everybody competes, values for power and money. There is, of course, some civil public education on politics and culture, music, art, literature, etc. But we have nothing for the entire care infrastructure of our society, without which we would not survive. Care of the environment, care of one another, care of other species. And that's what I mean about capitalocentric thinking in theory and practice. And it's the hidden curriculum of what we do. People often say, I'm surprised at how self-centered young people are when they leave the university or leave secondary school. And I say, why are you surprised? Why would they be otherwise? They have spent 14 years or maybe 18 years learning how to compete other people. The more successful students hoard knowledge to excel in examinations, and the more they're rewarded for that. And as Nancy Folber, the American economist, pointed out, altruism, if we want it, or community, doesn't fall from, emanate for our genes or fall from the sky. We build it socially, culturally, economically, and politically. So what I'm saying is, it's time to move beyond capitalocentric thinking about education. But put capital at the centre of all meaning making. Even educational advancement or new competencies or lifelong learning are all about making people better market actors. People will tell you cuts for community education. It's not seen to be productive. Even though they maintain people going to see their neighbours, looking after their neighbours, keeping elderly people in the community, minding people who have dependency needs, it's fundamental to the sustaining of community life and to mental health and well-being. But that doesn't count as work. But care is work. And without care, nobody would survive, even the most powerful of those of you who are here. We showed our lack of respect in the lack of funding for childcare in an organised, systematic way in the state. The handing over of care, even of children in care. I don't think people realise that. In the Republic at the moment, the biggest single sector for care for children who put in the care of the state is the for-profit sector. And the care of the older people is the same thing. And what I'm saying is we don't teach people how to care for themselves, the earth, or others. And I'm just saying, if we do that all the time, you learn habitually. That's why you learn. You don't just learn the theory, you learn habitually. And meaning making, I suppose, in life itself can't be reduced to the market. We are produced and reproduced through the care work of other people, through our relationality. We co-create one another relationally every day, and that is what we missed in COVID, even if we couldn't name it. Our presence of others, the affirmation of a smile, a greeting, a handshake, just the presence of another human being who affirms our existence. And as my colleague Margaret Crean has written about, people have a care consciousness as well as a political and economic and cultural consciousness. And it's a central trope of most cultures. But I suppose the reason I mention it is because it's also ethical. Care consciousness is an ethical consciousness. It can be enabled and resourced and endorsed to contest the values of neoliberal capitalism. We can create a different type of cultural milieu, and I believe that education is actually central to this. Imagine if we got up every day and we thought, how can I make the world a better place? If we began to think relationally. At the moment, we're hardwired to the next career advantage, the next success, the next promotion, the better job, the bigger house, the better car. But imagine if we began to think relationally, collectively, and other-centred way, rather than in the way to which we've been hardwired, say, over the last 40 or 50 years. I think it would be a very different world. And my argument is, yes, people are self-interested, but people are not purely self-interested. They're bound affectively, emotionally, and morally to others, even to unknown others. And humans' caring, relational, and moral life is at the centre of meaning-making and human identity. In the book we've published on affective equality, Love, Care and Injustice, 2009, is based on a series of studies of care workers of various kinds, at home and community, young and old, etc. And one of the things we found in that study was how much people's relationships matter. Their community relationships, their neighbourhood relationships, and their personal relationships. And that is what made them moral. Many people don't take promotion because they have care commitments, but we don't heap about it. We don't laud those people, nor do we say it's even desirable. And I'm saying if we need an alternative to capitalism, we have to make it up ourselves, in both the pedagogy and substance of education. And so this is a model I've spoken about many times previously. We live in this intimate life, and our intimate care sphere are our love relations, whether they're family or friends, but they are inalienable and non-commodifiable. You can't pay somebody in your primary care relations to go out for dinner with your partner or visit your father if he's in hospital and say that that is yourself. That is an inalienable relationship and non-substitutable. Then we have secondary care relations, which are hugely significant in education, because education is often the place in which people find succour and refuge when they do not have care in their families. Of course, we need much more services and supports there, but we are really bereft of those in education. Everything can't be done by teachers or even SNAs. We need all those services for children and young people who are bereft of care. But the secondary care includes healthcare, education, social welfare, etc. And then there is, at the level of the tertiary sphere, care of the unknown other. We live in estates and we live in regions of the world, and the more equal those regions are, the better people's mental health and physical health, as Wilkinson and Pickett, the epidemiologists, have shown in a number of studies. So I'm saying these are real worlds. These are not imaginary worlds. And creating education to develop the capacities of those worlds, how we think about those worlds, is, in my view, a huge education task. Yeah, I think we need to bring this language of social justice, equality, care, into the formal public discourse. But I would put a health warning here, and this I do from when we set out in equality studies, what we set out to educate activists in 1990. Learning the right ideas doesn't make people act ethically. If anything we learned from Germany in the last war, one of the most sophisticated countries in Europe at the time, intellectually and technologically, is having right ideas alone is not enough to create a moral society. Showing and behaving ethically, we have to learn how to behave and to live ethically is foundational to learning. And that's what I loved about the new Politics and Society module, that they are required at least, subject to the Leaving Cert, they are required to do at least some action. It isn't just about learning the theory. I think you can learn ethics and morals in the abstract or in principles of morality, but translating thought to action is a different matter. And I would argue we need habitual practice. Principle, living out, practicing things in order to become moral. And we need to see knowledge, not just as we see it now, as a form of just acquisition. You know, a box you tick, at the personal level, seen as private capital acquisition that you sell on the labour market, at a political level as a means to growth, even if growth destroys the environment and the results of growth are not equally distributed. And I'm saying we can't focus simply on producing a market-ready, highly individualised cosmopolitan worker built around a calculating entrepreneurial self who will service the economy, which is where I think we are at now. Education is so important. If you go back to Althusser and his arguments about what are the main ideological institutions of the state, religion, the media, the family, and education. The only institution that is still democratically controlled is education, to a large degree. Family is a different issue and very problematic. But it's a hugely important space for rethinking the global order, rethinking and enable people the capacities about the big issues of the world. And what I'm saying, I suppose, is instrumental reasoning is not enough. For example, I just take something very practical, and I know it meets such resistance because I met it in higher education trying to do it. If we reward everybody always individually, always for their own individual success, then how can they learn to cooperate cooperatively and collectively? How can they see the merits and the limitations of having to live in a world with cooperation? Cooperative learning, joint projects, collective evaluations. It would be a radical rethink in how we do assessment. So I'm saying, I suppose, to finish off, because I know it's time, the limits of Cartesian rationalism. It's only one way of knowing the world. Feelings are, as Martha Nussbaum, the philosopher, has pointed out at length, feelings are reasonable. If people are fearful, they are fearful for a reason. We can educate people's emotions, but not just privately. And I hear talk of resilience, I nearly cry, because we have to educate people to think politically and collectively, not just individually. And not to move beyond thinking of the atavistic self and the naive intellectualism. So what I'm saying is a need for a new epistemology and ontology to inform education, because I think learning to think relationally and cooperatively in a care-centred way is very important. So I will leave it there, if that's all right. Thank you very much.
Kathleen's going to come back in a second to take some questions and answers. I would like to thank you on behalf of everybody here. I mean, I wrote loads of notes, but I stopped because it was just so important to listen there to Kathleen just opening up windows on the world to us here and inspiring us maybe as teachers to have the courage to believe that our opinion matters, that we have a voice, that we too can do something about this, and perhaps too that children have a voice, and how do we empower them to use it. So there were so many questions there for teachers that Kathleen raised, and I think just as human beings, more importantly, but whole questions like the power of language, how we use language, how we misuse language, big questions like what kind of society do we want? massive questions. Do our children discuss that and know that they can make a difference in that society? And all about ethical education, learning to behave ethically. There are questions that we as educators should be considering whenever we're designing our curriculum, designing assessments. The culture of competition, all raised, and here it's all the people who were the fastest runners. It's all the successful people, the win-win people. That's us. So we are the people in those leading positions in schools, and we have to be very aware of that. I'll not talk anymore. I could talk forever on that, and there's going to be loads of opportunities for us to continue on. But I would like to thank Kathleen, maybe just a round of applause to thank her at this stage. And to invite everybody to take this opportunity to ask questions if you wish. I would like you to introduce yourself and to keep your question fairly concise if you can. Kathleen may prefer to sit for a while. You're happy enough? Okay. So there is a roving mic going around, I believe. Yeah, I think that there is a roving. Is there? Yes, there is. So, who would like to begin?
Somebody back there as well? No?
Once we start, it'll...
Yeah, cool. Sorry.
Conor Galvin, University College Dublin.
Sorry, I have a hearing problem now, so you'll have
I
to
should be aware of that, Kathleen. It's Conor Galvin, University College Dublin. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I
yeah,
can.
okay. It's a question really about the role of universities in the challenge that we now face. I'm aware that you spent a lot of your years working very hard within the academy. Is the university setting a hopeless one when it comes to dealing with this type of issue? Have we gone too far down that track, or is there hope for us yet as an institution in relation to countering capitalism through care?
Well, I suppose I'm always hopeful, but I also know that there are a long and a short answer to it. The long answer, of course, is that the universities have become incorporated into the business of the state in terms of producing the technology and expertise of the state. That is the fact, and that is not just true of Ireland. And the danger of that is that has become increasingly how it's funded and what its programs are and what's funded. But, I don't think that's any excuse, especially in the Republic, if I may say so. We have permanent posts. Nobody will fire you for dissenting. In fact, they expect you to dissent. And I think maybe because of COVID, it has kind of gone into abeyance. But I really think we need to become much more active protagonists if we want a different type of university. I know the heads of university will always say, well, we're under pressure. The Department of Education of Higher Education expects to do this, this and this. But it's up to us to create the public discourse. It's up to us to put out a different agenda. And for example, let's say the university started an initiative on different modes of assessment. Let's say they did tomorrow, that half of our programs were going to be assessed by cooperative learning and projects. I can guarantee you it'll have a trickle-down effect, because we will start to see others saying, oh, maybe they're going to start to assess the Leaving Cert that way. Maybe. So we have a role model, if you like, to play in terms of assessment and thinking and new ideas about education and who is a citizen and what is a citizen. And I think that we haven't contested that in the public space sufficiently. And that is a big challenge, because I remember being asked in Trinity when we wrote the last book with Jim and Bernie Grummel in particular on new managerialism in education at a seminar with the president, or the provost was there and all, saying, oh, but we're under pressure. But I don't think, yes, people are under pressure, but we have to think of doing things differently. We are the thinkers. We are paid to think. We are paid to dissent, in my view. And of course, I've always held the view that you must always remain institutionally and personally distant from places of power. I mean, I have very particular political views, but I don't have any close alliance with any political institutions or party or anything else, because I think that is the independence of mind of an academic. We can't be beholden to anybody, even people who are politically of our own persuasion. And that, I think, is the role academics have. How they can do it, I think we can start a debate. We can start a forum. We can start discussions. There is nothing to stop us from doing it at all. And we can hold events. We have the capacity and the resources to do so. You know, so that's what I would say. I don't think it's hopeless at all. And many people in the world, like, I mean, if you look at, we're becoming irrelevant, is what I would say. A lot of education is becoming irrelevant. It's not irrelevant for producing drones and technology and also very positive things. But let's say, take for example, I don't know if people have read the book on the age of surveillance capitalism about how the state and AI are monitoring everything that we do. What is educationists to say about this? Is the human condition to be subject to constant surveillance? Who will control it? Where are we leading the way on this? What are we saying about war? What are we saying about starvation? Every night we have it on television. It's all normalized. People don't even notice it anymore. They probably turn it off. Have we become so immoral that we don't see it or feel it? So my thing is we need to start to educate students to become ethical agents, even if that is a controversial term. I think we have to have a debate about what is that. Because I don't know, but I certainly know that if we don't do it, we'll become completely irrelevant. You know, it doesn't matter if you produce arms. Of course it matters if you produce technology that produces arms, because arms are there to kill people. That's what they're there for. They're not there for the good of your health. And people will say there are multiplier effects, and of course, absolutely, people are right. There have much medical advancement been made on foot of technology produced through war. That is true. But perhaps we could do it through other ways. Are we just going to escalate the world to a place where all we can think of is to produce goods and services of terror and violence? Because that's where we're at the moment in the world. So.
Time for a few questions. If anyone would like to take this opportunity.
Thank you, Kathleen. Maureen Caliker from the Irish National Teachers Organisation. Thank you for that. It was truly inspiring. In the programme for government, there is a promise for a citizens' assembly on education. Do you think that would be a good opportunity for us to look at these really important questions? And how do we stop that assembly from becoming just a debate about the Leaving Cert or religion in education or Gaeilge? How do we focus that assembly on these really big and important questions?
Well, I must say I'm delighted to hear, because actually I spoke a few times on that. I didn't realise it was in the programme from government and we shouldn't, not following politics. I absolutely agree with you. A citizens' assembly would be a great way to start. But it would have to be to set, and there are big players here. The teacher unions, there's senior people here from the universities. You are party, the teaching council. You can play a role in redefining it, so it isn't about what subject is on the Leaving Cert or how it's marked. You are the people who can set the tone and set the agenda by the terms of reference. As you know, the terms of reference for a committee are extremely important. And if you have it, how could we, even if we don't agree on how we could, for example, like most students when they do their degrees, they never learn about ethics. Never. Absolutely nothing. What it is to behave ethically if you are, I'm very close to some people who are in immunology in UCD. And one of them has just done a PhD on integrity in science, because although he's a scientist, he said, because I see the lack of integrity and honour in so much of what we do, we are dictated by the pharmaceutical industry. And if we don't get a positive result, well, we kind of really have to reduce it because they won't fund us the next time. So those are big issues. I absolutely agree with you. I think it would be a really welcome development. Thank you for asking.
Hi Kathleen, Mairead Holden. I'm one of the doctoral students that are here at SCoTENS today, and it came up during our round table earlier around care, and thank you for adding to our knowledge around that and provoking our thinking. For those of us who are just very much beginners and really striving to engage in ethically careful practice in research and trying to move beyond this idea of perhaps procedural ethics, could you please share some advice or guidance around how to bring care and ethics in practice to our work as doctoral researchers and beginning researchers, particularly in light of the fact that we're quite vulnerable around that neoliberal space? We perhaps wouldn't have the power to go against particular ways or practices because of that vulnerability. So any thoughts or insights, advice or guidance you can offer for those of us just beginning our journey? Thank you.
I hope I have understood you correctly. I know you talk about it, but I suppose let me go back to when you spoke. One of the saddest things I had was a few years ago. I was invited to the University of Sussex to speak to a group of, an academic talk with a lot of PhD students there. And I spoke about the concept of care. And a number of the women came up to me. They were young women, and they told me, I raised the question of having a baby when you were doing your PhD. And they told me that they had all been told that under no circumstances should they have a baby while they were doing their PhD. And I thought that was one of the saddest things I ever heard. But that reflects the fact, the performativity that I speak about. I think there is, when you say how do you take, I'm not sure whether you're talking about yourself or whether you're talking about the work, because I do think that students are, like I would say now, for example, a lot of people who come, I've supervised a lot of PhD students, and always people will come to me and I'd say, first thing I'll tell you is this won't guarantee you to get a job. I think that's my first act of care, to be honest, in academia, because there are too few of them. It may help you if you want to, but it won't guarantee it. And I think there's a huge PhD market. There's a lot of money being made by departments. There's a lot of status attached to it. So I think the universities themselves have questions to answer on what is care? Is it care? Of course, there's personal care, respect for people's private decisions if they want to have children. But there's also the care of the institution to give you a degree which they tell you is going to achieve X, but it's not, it's going to achieve Y. So I think that it depends when you say by care, do you mean care of those with whom you're doing research? Well, I think that's a very big issue, because I don't know who you're working with. As you know, it's impossible now to do research with children, and there's a lot of exploitation, etc., that goes on. And so in terms of how research is used and all the rest of it, there is a colonizing, is what I'd say. My experience now of working I'd work still a lot with people in the various working class communities obviously on a voluntary basis. And as for travellers, they are extraordinarily skeptical of academia. Extraordinarily so. And I think they feel that the academics come, they take the data about us, as one of them said to me, and they claim to know you better than you know yourself. And then they use that power back over you. So I think those are very big ethical issues for minorities, whether it's travellers or whether it's people who are in disadvantaged working class communities who feel that they're being researched to death. As somebody said to me one day, I don't want to see any more researchers. It hasn't changed my life. So now you as PhD students can't change that. You know, you can't change the politics of class and race and ethnicity in the society. But you can contribute to the debate by not adding to the pain of those who have been suffering that way. And maybe making your research more political and sometimes maybe more controversial. That's what I would say. I don't know if I'm answering you correctly, because I hope I'm hearing you properly. I'm not sure. Thank you. I'm doing my best anyway.
Thank you. My name is Michelle O'Keefe. I'm a doctoral student with UCC, but I also teach in a secondary school. I teach English, philosophy and politics and society. So the students will be delighted to hear I was actually speaking to you. Thanks. So my question is in relation to teaching ethics, because I do still teach, and you were mentioning the 4 kind of influences on people. Media was one and education was the other out of 4. And what I'm finding over the last 5 years especially is that when I'm teaching normative ethics to students, they're more and more and more influenced by the media and by social media, and it's very, very difficult to teach these days even ethics from a normative perspective when there's an anti-intellectualism growing and continuing to grow. And I'm just wondering, did you ever look at anything like that so far, or in relation to care?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think, that's what I'm saying about education being lost in space a bit. That's where young people are at. They are online. They are on social media all the time, every day. Whether they should or not is another matter, but they are. So I think unless you're studying it, unless you're analysing it, like unless you do that and somebody comes in with that narrative, that story, and said, now we're going to analyse that. Where did you get that information? Let's do a programme on that, the next class. We are going to take that. Unless you confront it. But otherwise, trying to be denied that it's happening, but it also I'm talking about it individually, but it needs to be systematic. You need, the word critical education is spoken about very glibly, but what I would always say that there is, when I say about naive intellectualism, what I mean, I suppose, is that just learning ideas, and this is the right idea, that's not a right idea, etc., or this is the right way, that alone doesn't work. People have to experience the fact that what harm does this kind of work to other people? What is the ethical implications of this social media? You know what I'm saying? We have to investigate, interrogate, constantly analyse it, but that needs to be part maybe of several disciplines, not just one. There needs to be a radical rethink because, as I said, the 4 are religion, the media, education, and the family. And the media for young people is really powerful, and it is hugely influential. But what does education do about it if it's not addressing it directly? That, I think, is the question. And I'm not an expert on curriculum and all the rest of it, like a lot of people here are, but I definitely feel we need to analyse, we need to criticise, we need to confront, and we need to look at what the harm that's done and the good that's done, because not everything is bad either. You don't want to create that kind of dystopian view of media. It's not true. So I'm just saying, I don't know, in an individual classroom, what you can do is very different to what I think should be done systematically. And I'm arguing for a care-led education, one where we think of what kind of research will we do that will make the world more care-centric rather than capital-centric. And how would that happen, or how would that apply to the media? What would it mean? For a start, I believe, for example, you should be able to prosecute people who malign people on the media. I absolutely think it's unbelievable that that is allowed to happen, because that is the biggest form of bullying of young people now is online. And that should be made illegal. If you do it in print, it's illegal. Why? If you do it on radio, it's illegal. Why is it not illegal on the media? In social media, I mean.
Maybe one more question. That is actually a beautiful way, I think, just to round things up. Kathleen?
Thank you very much.
Bringing care right back to the discourse, and we will take so much away from that, back to our institutions, back into our schools. So a really, really warm thank you, Kathleen. Thank you to everybody who has taken part so far in our programme. We can now have a break, and we will meet together at 3:15 for the parallel sessions. That's on the first floor with lots of people around to point you in the right direction. Enjoy your break.